Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells, chapters 47 through 51. Mind Blind, Honorable Traitor, Never Volunteer, With the Enemy, and Endless Hunt. In these chapters, our friends manage to convince Valia to team up with them, which she eventually agrees, but not before she does something pretty dramatic that I'm not mad at her for the record. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. I am a little bit surprised at myself that I didn't consider the writing of the letter to Alustin being somebody directly involved in Havathi politics, because I thought that it would be that they knew what direction it would go for them. And I'm finding myself a little baffled about what she thought was going to happen, because I think evidently the Duark was like, oh, he'll just betray Candoron and that'll be that. And I guess just dramatically underestimated the level of rage that Alustin was going to be feeling. So that really sucks for her. It just, you really, when you decide that you're going to manipulate people in certain ways, you better feel very confident that you know who they are. Because I feel like Valia could have seen this coming. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, let's start off. Chapter 47, Mind Blind. So we have, again, this like whole... The maze that is breaking, that's letting out all of these other creatures. There is a bunch of demons because they spawn. I don't know if they spawn from or are drawn to. I actually can't recall exactly how this works, but when some place is really, really ether dense, this is what happens. So yeah, we've got demons finally beginning to turn up. And it's interesting that like, Hugh realizes he doesn't actually have a good way of explaining why he knows that they're demons, and is just sort of distracted by, and I am fascinated by this too. He's just like, no, there was just something about them that felt wrong, that, you know, just, you knew. And let's see. Mackerel still can't track Alustin down, and there's something different about this group. It looks like they're protecting someone important. Sabe scowled and peered down. You're thinking we could extract them as a target of opportunity while we wait for clues to Alustin's location. Hugh nodded. Whoever it is, they're not participating in the defense, and it doesn't look like they have any significant archmages guarding them. So they head down, and I love this, the abduction went incredibly smoothly, and he was just like, that's too smooth. It said something about how many extra crystal nodes he'd built since recovering his magic, that he was able to maintain his personal armor, the attention ward around the three of them, another attention ward around Godric and Talia, and then, before they even landed, wrap their target in a ward cage. Sabe hit first, detonating her wind armor to knock most of the Havathi to the ground, and a few down into the yellow-green lake. So they are able to like move this thing, and it's like a box. And nobody recognizes who it is except for Sabe. She says that it's Duark Icola. I don't remember, and this may not be something that has been explained. It may be something that we just need to sort of like accept on faith, or accept on faith makes it sound as if I'm like sort of rolling my eyes, and that's not what I mean, but the amount of knowledge that Sabe has about politics, we usually are willing to just be like, well, she just knows that's her thing. But I am curious about how this would work. Like, do they do anything with like image transferring in this world? What I'm asking is ultimately about, has she seen a picture of Duarc Icola? Like, how does she know? And it's not important. I'm just like kind of curious about this because I would like a little bit more of an idea of how this sort of information would be circulated, if you get what I'm saying. So immediately he was pumping more mana into the cage because they're like, oh shit, okay, this is a problem. And Talia says, why hasn't she tried to break out yet? And Sabe says, because she's mind blind, which I don't think we knew, but I may be wrong about that. The most politically powerful woman on the continent, and she's mind blind. Not even from a prominent noble family. She's the fourth daughter of a minor rural noble family. She worked her way up to the top the hard way, with cunning, patience, and ruthlessness. She might not be able to cast any cantrips, but she's more dangerous than the vast majority of great powers. That is wild. Like, I really want just a fucking prequel with Duarc Icola's backstory. I am super, super interested in how this could even work, you know? So they're just sort of like, well, what the fuck do we do with her? We're supposed to be focused on Alustin, and this is sort of, you know, a chore that we did not plan on. And Sabe is the one who's like, actually, I think that she might be able to be useful to us. I think that we need to use her to persuade the Havathi to ally with us against Alustin. And honestly, it was surprising to me how much Talia, like, immediately rejected this idea as crazy, because I was like, if you can, I mean, the whole thing was that they were against Alustin in the first place. And if you are very serious about taking him down, allying with somebody else who, like, wanted him dead is sort of the natural next step. And eventually she does get them on board with that. Dan says, I really like this. Again, Havath isn't just mustache twirling evil. Here in the evil empire, the mind blind person got to the top. MX Shard says, it's probably information accessed through... I know that that's supposed to say K and DAS spy networks, but it autocorrected to Karen DAS, and I am so sorry, but that is hilarious. That is amazing. I'm so sorry. Oh my god. But yeah, but that's sort of the thing that I'm curious about, MX Shard, is like, I understand that in broad strokes, it's the spy network, but how do they get everybody, like, knowing what someone looks like? Do they have something like a photo? Can they capture a likeness? You know, how do they do that? That's the part that I'm just sort of curious about. But yeah, she's like, let's just tell them that they need to help us hunt him down because he has this, elemental plague thing. To which Hugh is like, oh, wow, yeah, I forgot about that. Well, I suppose we can. And then she brings up Talia. So she tried to kill us, remember? This is Godric. And Sabe rolls her eyes and says, she didn't try that hard. And I was just laughing because, like, she's right. But it just sounds so ridiculous, just like, I mean, she kind of tried to kill us, whatever. It's just not a big deal. So let's see. You really think that Duarc could get Valia to work with us? Sabe shook her head. No, we'll get Valia to work with us. She clearly respects us enough for that. We don't even need to speak with Icola. Probably better not to, in fact. Bargaining with Icola would be as foolish as all those Havathi idiots that keep monologuing at us. Keep her in the box. And I really do appreciate that this is not the first time in this section that the monologuing thing is brought up. And later on, Valia is like, So let's see, because they figure out what their angle is going to be. Eventually, even though Godric is like, all right, I guess I don't have any better ideas. They all are in for it, but it's really the way that this goes off. It's like, I don't feel like it could have worked if it weren't for the state of mind that Valia is in. So we go to chapter 48, Honorable Traitor. And Mackerel leads them through the labyrinth, but it's breaking, and it's everything about this labyrinth is like not standard because of what it's going through. And so he can lead them, but only so well. It's not as flawless a system as it had been. Meanwhile, the temperature is still continuing to go up, and I don't remember exactly how long the Eye of Heliothrax takes to power up. I'm feeling like we're at maybe like 5 minutes at this point from when we first heard that she was starting it, and I don't know if I'm right about that, but it's kind of hard for me to estimate the timing of all of this. It took half as long as expected to reach Valia, but she hadn't moved a muscle in the meantime. She was still sitting where Mackerel had scryed her, dangling her legs off the edge of a labyrinth corridor as she stared down at a heap of rubble. And they had been like, oh, we gotta approach her really carefully, but they see her here and they're sort of like, I don't know what we should do. Her whole vibe is really weird right now. And Valia is actually the one who initiates conversation. She says, "What's in the box?" She doesn't say it like that, but I'm sorry, guys. I can't ever read or hear the phrase "what's in the box" and not immediately go to Seven. A movie, by the way, that I never even saw. That is how pervasive that meme is that even if you haven't seen the movie, it's just part of so they're like, okay, well, we've got Icola, and she's like, oh, and let me guess, unless I surrender, you're gonna kill her. And they're like, no, actually. And they just open the box and let her out. And I don't know why I found this so surprising, but as soon as she gets out of the box, she says to Valia, "Captain Warwell, explain." And I was sort of like taken aback. Because look, she had been imprisoned essentially. And she is released, but instead of trying to do anything to escape immediately or negotiate with the people who had her imprisoned, she kind of gets snippy with one of the people on her own side, which really does make sense stepping back and looking at the fact that she doesn't have magic, so she would be dependent on Valia to defend her. But I was expecting her to try and throw her weight around with Hugh and his friends, and I just didn't think that she was going to get snotty with Valia. And she says, "These are enemies of the state. I command you to deal with them immediately." And Valia says, "What state?" And she tries to be like, "Oh, we're not done. We haven't lost the war." And Valia starts to list off her grievances and says we should not have carried out Project Vengeful Sword. Icola is like, I definitely agree with that, and I am the one who decided to leak the information so that they couldn't be used the way that they had been intended. "We never should have turned my warlocks into disposable shock troops," Valia said. "I'm as guilty as you there. The sacred swordsmen predate both of us as an institution. It's a regrettable situation, but it would have taken political capital we lacked to change this state of affairs." And throughout all of this, Icola is not looking at Valia. She's talking to her, having a full conversation, but she is just watching Hugh and company. "I never should have taken the weapons of last resort out of their vault," Valia said. "I had no idea you did so," Icola said. Valia laughed humorlessly. No one outside the Sacred Swordsman did. It was purely my own volition. And that I didn't realize. And it may have been said and I missed it, or it may have been, that I just made an assumption. But, I had been sort of defending Valia against the accusations that Alustin was throwing at her regarding the warlocks being treated like they are disposable. And I still stand by a lot of that, because these warlocks were like old enough that I think they are making a decision for themselves that, while not a wise decision, and maybe they are being manipulated to a degree, that's on them to choose what they want to do. So I was defending her in that respect, and I was pointing out the fact that, like, these weapons, they couldn't wait to get their hands on them. It wasn't even like, oh, I know that this is scary and I have to convince you by saying it's going to be worthwhile and you're fighting for the Havathi people. No, they were like fucking hype to take these weapons. So I really do try to keep that in mind amongst all of this like guilt that's happening. But there's also something to be said for like recognizing that people have been fed a certain type of propaganda their whole lives. And even if they do make certain choices, and even if they do like decide to risk their own lives, maybe they don't have the adequate information to really make an informed choice. And does it count, and does it excuse things? And I just like Valia better for the fact that she takes this as a personal responsibility, because she could very believably step away from all of it and be like, that wasn't my fault, and she chooses to shoulder that. And that makes me just respect her a lot more. Icola didn't have a glib response, and Valia didn't give her the chance to come up with one. Instead, she leapt off the side of the labyrinth corridor, hauling Icola with her, and descended on the winds to the rubble below. Icola, to her credit, only gave one short scream just before Valia summoned the winds. And as they're descending, Hugh is like only getting parts of the conversation, but he is hearing about how Icola had enslaved these liches. And of course, Icola is doing the whole, well, you have to make the hard choices. When you're a ruler, sometimes you have to do things for the greater good, yada, yada, yada. And I love Valia. Oh, so you would have made the system less corrupt if you'd had more power, which is such a, like, that's the thing about trying to fix things from the inside. I'm not saying that's not a worthy goal. I'm not even saying that, like, in every case it doesn't work. But there are certain situations where trying to fix something from the inside is futile. And I fully believe this about, for example, law enforcement. There is just a baked in sort of bullying and need to fall in line that I don't think you can like get to a point where you begin to make changes to things without succumbing to that culture in a way that ultimately makes you unable to enact the kinds of changes that are really necessary. So it's just, like there are ways that I think this is true and a valid way to approach a situation if it seems like, okay, well, this was a system that was put in place with excellent intent and got corrupted over time, versus something like law enforcement, which was started from a corrupt base and it just grew like a hydra from there, and not any part of it has ever really been embedded in an ultimate good cause. Cops started initially as fucking slave catchers, and grew to be, we're just going to bully minorities into doing what they're told, and has remained pretty much that, and a protector of the interests of the elite. And that's not really something that you can like just undo because that's baked in. So anyway, the way that she said that to Icola, I was just like, ooh, she really kind of got her there. And then she says, you're right. Sometimes we're presented with terrible choices. We were both presented with those choices, and we both chose to sacrifice others, to sacrifice children, to send them into battle unprepared. And I love that she says, you know, maybe if it had worked, we could have told ourselves it was worthwhile, which is a really, really important distinction. The despair that she is feeling ultimately isn't just because of what she did. It's because what she did failed so utterly and was so pointless. I mean, these kids had these weapons that were supposed to make them a real threat. And not only did they not really get any hits on Alustin, Alustin was able to disassemble them really, really easily in a way that's so insulting. It's just like, it's just really, really humbling. And that is is getting at her so badly, which I found really, really compelling. The fact that it's not just, oh, I should never have made these choices. It's, I made these choices for nothing. And I wonder if they had succeeded, would she be able to sleep at night? Would she feel okay about this? Because like, you can, if you succeed at all and you can keep telling yourself it's for the greater good, and it seems like that's actually working out. I don't know. I just think it's really interesting that that's pointed out specifically. Your continued enslavement of the intertwined for nothing. We only had an excuse for demanding sacrifices from others if those sacrifices were worth something. If those sacrifices worked, it was only a bare, paltry excuse, and one that should have been laughed at in a just world. And we failed to live up to even that. All those sacrifices were for nothing. Havath deserved better than you. It deserved better than me. I have a question for you. Are you a member of an organization from another world interfering with the rightful course of Ithonian history? And Icola does that's absurd. Have you gone mad? And Hugh is like, I could see something in her face. This is on target. And she says, I'm not going to kill you, Valia. I'm not going to do anything to you. There was a rumbling not so far above them, and the rubble began pouring off the great ruined face of the Lich Avatar above them. To Hugh's shock, one of the great stone lids opened, revealing a great bronze eye filled with spell forms and slowly turning gears. Valia, you yet live, as do you. Not for long. And he's like, just citing their losses here. And she says, Icola, you can still serve the Dominion. You may still give meaning to their deaths. The ground seemed to rumble, and Hugh realized the Lich was growling. And he asks, do you know my name? And Icola is like, I'm not sure if you're north, maybe southeast, because, I'm sort of mixed up about the directions right now. I apologize. And he says, not my designation, not my directional label, my name from before I was a Lich. I'm sorry, Icola said. Your prior identities were carefully concealed to prevent reprisals against your family and friends. I don't know your name, nor those of any of your compatriots. The massive Lich Avatar sighed heavily. Neither do I. And man, that really got to me. I thought he was asking because he was like, you're going to say my fucking name before I kill you. But he doesn't even have that information himself. He doesn't even know. And that is a real, like, I mean, that's just, what a bummer. That got to me. The pile of rubble under Icola began to move, to flow freely and then to float, forming the shape of a vast hand. Icola seemed to know what was coming as she stood on the Lich's palm and didn't bother trying to run. She just turned to Hugh and his friends and sighed heavily. I never should have sent that letter to Alustin. And then the hand clenched and there was only a clenched fist. And I love that it's not like blood spurted or anything. It's just, probably the hand is so huge that even if she is squeezed to death, there's no way that blood is going to travel far enough for them to even see. And this just, again, the fact that it was her that sent this letter to Alustin, I don't know, because like my hope, here's what I'm gonna say here, and I don't think this is likely to happen, but my hope is that Alustin is told by somebody who witnessed this that Icola is the one who sent him the letter, and it causes him to suddenly reevaluate everything. And I don't know if that's even possible for him right now. If he has gone so far as to just be like, reevaluating is pointless. Like, we've come too far for that. But what I want is for him to suddenly realize the way that somebody attempted to play him and how he like fell into this trap. Because like, guys, as soon as I heard about this letter, I was like, Alustin, how do you not see what they are expecting you to do? Like, how do you not get that this was sent to you explicitly so that you would turn on Candoron? You are walking right into the trap they've set, or at least if it's not a trap, you are doing them a favor, and it's unlikely they are your friend. And I was really frustrated that he didn't seem to consider that. And I know that this, like, she said that she sent this letter to Alustin. I can't recall, but I feel like it was mentioned that other people got a similar copy of the letter, or he showed it to them. I don't remember. But nobody else apparently kind of stopped to wonder where this information was coming from and what the ultimate motivation was. So what I would like is for Alustin to suddenly put two and two together, that he's been played, and yeah, it went in a way that like they didn't intend or expect, but ultimately that's not really what matters here. It's the fact that he just like trotted along and did what they wanted immediately in the most predictable fashion, which should be kind of embarrassing. And maybe that will cause him to sort of like recontextualize everything that he has done. Because the one thing about Alustin is that he is so contrary. He likes to be somebody who's doing his own thing by his own rules, and he likes to fancy himself as like one step ahead of everybody else. And if he were brought back down to earth and told, nah, bro, you literally were like a pawn that she moved very easily, I want to believe that would be really sobering. And it would make him like uncertain enough to do anything else based on where he started from. However, wanting to destroy Havath in the end is a separate desire from taking down Candoron. You know, like, so I can't decide if that is going to be enough of a factor or not. I don't know how important it's going to be to him that who sent the letter at this point. Will it even matter? You know, I feel like he has enough pride that it will matter, but I'm not totally sure of that. And will he even believe them? And why would it come up? Because this is the thing that's like, when I first started this, I sort of cut myself off, but what I keep coming back to is how it would even be mentioned to him. Oh, by the way, Icola was like, had sent you a letter. She mentioned it. Why would they say anything about that to him? They wouldn't necessarily know the significance of that and hold it as something so important that the next time they see him, they have to mention it. I don't know if Valia knows the extent of that. Like, because Valia was here for this whole thing. So if she is aware of the letter that caused Alustin to suddenly break faith, maybe she'll be able to drop this bomb. But Hugh and his friends say what letter, so they have no idea. And that gives me no reason to think that this is going to ever be mentioned in conversation. Like, I don't know how much conversation there is remaining to have. The only way that I could see that working is that if they like manage to sort of capture and immobilize Alustin, so that, because if what I mean is, after the way the fight went down earlier, I don't know how we have another back and forth between all of them and Alustin. They have seen how deadly he is, and he has figured out their pact at this point. I don't feel like they go into another confrontation with him and they let him talk, or they decide to talk. I feel like that moment has passed. Now, they don't want to just kill him because they want to be able to access his other, like, interdimensional space. But that's a different, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I just keep sort of circling around the notion that if he knew, the only other option is to convince Alustin, because, like, I'm coming from a place at this point of Alustin is not going to succeed in destroying the Tongue Eater. That's where I'm at right now. Is like, that's not going to happen, because that would mean the end of everything, because I'm assuming that Kandaron is correct and he just doesn't understand fully. And if I'm going from a place of he doesn't do it, either he is stopped, somebody else gets a hold of it, or they convince him not to do it. And if they are convincing, the only other way that I could see is managing to get him to believe that Kandaron's information is more accurate than his, that what she believes is true, and that he fails to have complete understanding. That's a really tricky thing, because Alustin is not impossible in that respect. Like, he definitely is willing to learn. It's his favorite thing in a lot of ways. So I don't think that he is, like, in personality, someone that is totally unwilling to listen. But at this point, where we are, that's what really, like, is going to make or break the situation. If they had managed to, like, stop him and talk to him days before this and be like, dude, you don't seem to really, like, be giving this being that's hundreds of years old's opinion the weight it probably deserves. Have you considered that there's something about this you don't know or understand? Maybe days earlier, he would have been like, you know what, let's sit down and have this debate. I just don't see that being, again, something that happens unless they restrain him and get him in a place where he has no choice but to listen to them. And if he does listen, then what? You know what I'm saying? So he doesn't decide that he's going to destroy the Tongue Eater. Does he just give it back? Like, and what, get arrested or executed, or like, what even, what do you do then? I genuinely have no idea in what sense that story progresses. Do we punish him for all that he has done and the way that he has manipulated everybody? Does he get killed because, he succeeded in destroying Havath, and while it wasn't the population killer that he was hoping for, it's still something, so maybe there is a feeling of satisfaction to him in the end? I don't know, but I just keep sort of like going around and around with these thoughts of like, well, if this, then what then? And it's such an odd and high stakes situation that I can't come up with like an adequate a series of actions after he decides, oh, okay, you've convinced me, I'm not going to do it. So in that case, it's just like holding him down, taking the thing out of his space and killing him. But that doesn't seem to be the way that John Bierce likes to tell a story. He really likes having characters listen to each other and communicate. That's his favorite, So that's what I'm stuck on, is I feel like that has to be the way it happens. I just don't know what happens then. So anyway, this moment here is when Valia is like, all right, I'm going to help you out to the Lich. And he says, thank you. At least I die free. Valia bowed her head. Hugh couldn't see any effects from her magic, but the distant and not so distant noises of battle rumbled around them and began to echo strangely, and the light refracted in odd rainbows at the corners of his eyes. The gears inside the Lich Avatar's huge bronze eye began to slow, and then silently ground to a halt. A moment later, the echoes and refractions in the air vanished. And this is just like, for me, just sort of cruel, where Valia has already been through so much and had to end so many lives, or been responsible for ending so many lives, and now she has to do this to the Liches. I just feel bad for her. Like, this woman needs a break from killing, she needs a little vacay. So then we go to chapter 49, Never Volunteer, and we are with Rafe of Clan Castus. And I love the fact that his fiance says he just enjoys being miserable, because he's like, I always said I wouldn't volunteer for stuff because it's a stupid thing to do, and then yet I keep doing it. And she's like, yeah, well, you like to, stay awake until 3 a.m. And then you got involved with me, a baker who has to get up to start things at like 4:30. So obviously you just like not being happy, which eventually he comes to the conclusion that she has to be right based on the, some of the things that he does. The labyrinth didn't, Rafe was careful to note, rise out of the ground. There wasn't nearly enough debris pushed up by its rise. If dirt and stone mages were to dig into the few remaining streets of Havath City, they'd find that many of the labyrinth columns and corridors only descended a few feet into the soil. Maybe a few went deeper, but the labyrinth hadn't been buried at all. The first minutes after the labyrinth rise had been terrifying, but once Luthi and Raymel the Chained had restored command, they'd quickly established fortifications out of the ruins of a Havathi palace. So they secure their location, and it says it had been nightmarish enough leading lost mages back to their lines just through moving Havathi troops. But 20 or so minutes ago, Alustin's forces had begun probing at both the Havathi and the Coven, and unfortunately, they had more surviving great powers than Havath, while the Coven's powers were tied up in battle against Heliothrax, which makes sense. Heliothrax is basically like 3 or 4 great powers at this point, maybe more. So, that sounds right to me. So we get a description of like some of the battles between different powers and what they're up to. Given that he was escorting 2 water mages and a badly wounded plant mage, all from Highvale, he didn't see how he could make it safely through any of the battlefield. The worst part was how pointless the fighting between the Coven and Alustin's forces were at this point. So far as Alustin's forces knew, they had already won. They had no tactical reason to keep engaging. But power was its own justification, and I like that as well. That just like, because they can, and probably pride. Those two things. Clan Castus began summoning a new elemental. Rafe felt a thread of anxiety deep within him begin to relax. That meant that enough of Clan Castus had made it back to the Coven's position to begin elemental summoning once more. And then another thread of anxiety began weaving itself inside of him as a truly terrible idea came into his head. "Nope," Rafe muttered, "not doing that. Just take the long path. Plenty of other people out searching for stragglers. You don't need to be in that big of a hurry to head back out." Despite his muttered complaints, Rafe was already gesturing for the 3 Highvale mages to follow him. The 4 worked their way carefully through the ruins, staying as low under cover as they could. They weren't heading toward the Coven, though. They were heading straight for the immense dome of smoke and illusion cloaking Andis Thune and Zerson Grey. "You're insane. We'll never make it through there," one of the water mages told him. "You might be right about my sanity, but we can definitely make it through here." He pointed to the elemental that was slowly rising above the Coven encampment and began to push against its windshield. "My affinity senses can use that as a beacon." And it turns out that he has some tattoos that enhance his senses, his affinity sense. So it's not directed towards fire like most of them do. Senses are a thing that Castus doesn't put as much energy into developing. And again, the first reason he was the only living member of Clan Castus to be recruited to the Hidden Clan. Oh, sweetie. They didn't need more destructive brutes. What they needed was were scouts to help them find their targets in the first place. The other reason he'd been recruited, of course, was the fact that he was one of the best spellform tattoo designers in Clan Castus. He'd been one of the main designers of Elinia's new lightning amplification spellform tattoo. He'd helped develop quite a few tattoos for the Hidden Clan since Rana of Clandaren had recruited him. Oh, babe. Oh, sweetie. Oh, you angel. So he decides that he's going to keep himself safe from the illusions and falling for them by just not looking at them, blocking his sight, so he ties something over his eyes. If he stayed alert, he should be able to lead the other mages through the wasteland of smoke and illusions, ground broken by siege magic and rising labyrinth corridors, and rubble warped into bizarre shapes and materials by dreamfire. Oh, blazes. Sarai was right, wasn't she? He really did enjoy making himself miserable. That was a fun one. I like that little section. So we go to chapter 50, and Sabe is watching Valia and really getting a sense, oh, this girl has completely fallen apart and feels like she has nothing left to lose. And if she feels that way, she could do anything. People who are at the end of their tether like this can be really unpredictable. And finally, Sabe says, Alustin isn't done. He has a bigger weapon. And he's like, what's he even going to use it on? Valia says, the whole city is dead. And Sabe's like, the city has been torn up, but the people are still alive. Do you think that's really where he would stop? And Valia, for her part, is like, I know that you guys have spread various rumors about what he has, but I think it's very clear that's bullshit. Why should I believe this whole thing about the plague? And the tack Sabe takes here is interesting, where she says, basically, you don't even need to know what the exact weapon is. You just need to know that it was a scary enough prospect that on her deathbed, or so we thought, Candoron was terrified at the prospect of it being used, and even more scared of the notion of other people finding out about it. That is how afraid of this she was. So we don't have to tell you exactly what it is. You just need to know that it was that kind of mission we got sent on. We're all out here risking our lives explicitly for this. And you know that his personality is such that he always wants the last word. And don't you think having one final blow to deliver sounds like him? Don't you feel like this all tracks? And Valia eventually begins to sort of like come over to their way of thinking on this. So here it is. Valia is like, well, if he has it, it's definitely on him in his, storage tattoo. And trying to get into those things is a fucking nightmare unless Candoron left you some sort of key to open it. Sabe's stomach clenched at that. Candoron had done nothing of the sort, but even a suspicion of that sort of key would make Hugh a far greater target than he already was, which was something that had not occurred to me. And Hugh very quickly is like, no, nothing like that. So she's like, well, he says, Hugh, I'm sorry, guys, I'm jumping around a little bit, but, one of the lessons Candoron drilled into my head over and over was that any weakness you built into your magic could and would be found and exploited by your enemies. Even she had to open the librarian Errant extraplanar spaces the hard way. To which Valia says, well, nobody thought she was a fool, just a monster, and Hugh gets very cranky, but he manages to keep that to himself. So what, you were planning to try and seize the weapon just before he used it? No, we think there's another way to access it. One inspired by your fight with Alustin at Dragonclaw Yardang. Valia gave her a perplexed look. I have no idea what you're referring to. I don't know what this moment means. Was Alustin in disguise fighting Valia? Does she not know she fought him? Or is her saying, I have no idea what you're referring to, just like, I don't get how that fight is relevant? I think it's that second one, but there was a moment with the way that was written where I thought that she meant she simply didn't remember the fight. And I think it's the second one, but Dan says they were having a fight there, and at one point Valia at the end was like, how did you escape that last trap? Oh, I don't remember that, Dan. Okay. So they have an idea of how he escaped it then. That's interesting. I'm really like, if based on the context here, it sounds like they think his escape is tied to his storage tattoo, which I have no idea how that could even work. Like, I guess you could, I don't know. Can you put a person in a storage tattoo? Is that, I don't know if there's something about that would kill someone, or do you know what I'm saying? Because like, if this were a different type of series, putting something in a storage tattoo would not kill them because it's just a storage space. But because Bierce is so firmly entrenched in the physics of things being consistent, the fact that it is extra dimensional would make it, I think, somewhat dangerous. So I don't know if it's like because like Alustin, it's in his forearm, right? His arm would still be exposed if he could jump into the space on his own arm. So wouldn't he sustain an injury on his arm with that? And is it dangerous for him to do that? Like, can he stay hidden inside his own space for any given length of time? I don't know. This has never been mentioned as a possibility, and I don't know if it's like just that it's not possible, or because I feel like if that were an option, Canteron would have mentioned it, right? I don't know. Or maybe that he was able to create a second tattoo, but Canteron does this with a very specific type of magic, and there's no reason for me to think that he could replicate that. I don't know. But anyway, so Valia says finally, what if I demand to know what the weapon really is? And Sabe is like, oh, she's talking in hypotheticals, which means that we've already got her. So finally, Valia agrees. Are the negotiations going well? Talia said. I really can't tell. You think it was a good idea to tell her about other worlds? Godric said. Yes, and probably yes. Hugh looked up from Mackerel. Mackerel wants you to know how good he's being, and not causing trouble at all, and that he deserves all the praise for it. Tell him I'll buy him lots of paper to eat once this is all over. The spellbook flapped his pages excitedly at that, and then simply froze. Mackerel finally spotted Alustin, and he's been encircled. He's not in immediate danger of capture, but we need to get moving fast. So, I love Valia. I did just help murder the leader of my nation, so I guess allying with the enemy to stop another enemy isn't too big in comparison. Let's go. And as they take off, it's mentioned that there is a crack growing on the labyrinth corridor that they have jumped off of. And the way that this ends with like, oh, there's a crack and it's growing is meant to be really dramatic. But I have to be honest, I don't know what the significance is of this, because the fucking labyrinth is already being killed and breaking through a city and causing huge destruction already. So I'm not certain why I need to worry about one more crack in a series of piles of rubble. Do you get what I'm saying? So I'm just curious about that. And then we have the last chapter, 51, Endless Hunt. And Alustin is basically in the crosshairs for a lot of people at this point because he doesn't have his labyrinth to keep people from being able to scry him. And it says he was fairly confident they had no way to stop the linguistic superweapon, but he refused to risk being wrong. Not even his death would stop the Tongue Eater now. He still fought and fled his foes, not out of some will to survive, but out of sheer stubbornness, out of desire to watch the Tongue Eater rupture, spill out its devoured languages in a tidal wave of madness across the lands of the Dominion. And this is where I start to be like, I don't know if they're going to be able to talk him out of this, kiddos. I just don't know. Like, and I had been sort of giving him the benefit of the doubt for a minute there that he was just trying to like destroy it in order to detonate it. But now he is talking about like letting the madness spread. And I guess he just thinks that like it won't spread that far, but it's something, there's something so much more upsetting about like, oh, I don't just want these people dead. I want them to like really suffer and lose their minds before they die. That feels like just unnecessarily, pointlessly cruel. Alustin, you really do need therapy so bad. So bad. Nyana Everflame was the first of his foes to track him down. He had no tools to counter her, but for all of her lethality, Alustin was simply faster. Two of Indris's children were the next to find him. He tried not to look at the Skyhold mages, tried not to recognize them. He failed. The next foe was Elethe Apex. The buffoonish excuse for a great power actually took him by surprise, somehow tackling him in midair, sending him tumbling most of the way to the ground. And this guy literally says to him, "Your time has come, villain. I am always here for people using the word villain in conversation with a person. Like, this is just, I love it. It's so stupid. This guy really thinks that he's in A Penny Dreadful. And honestly, I find it very enjoyable. Hey, Apex, did you know that it's illegal to till soil for farming in Sika's Eastern Territories? Excuse me? Their soil is arid and poor, and tilling causes too much erosion and topsoil degradation. Besides, it's not like there's a shortage of dirt mages there, so they make tilling completely superfluous. What are you blathering on about? Oh, I'm just distracting you, Alustin said with a smile, and then a flood of paper erupted from Alustin's storage tattoo, plastering all over Apex's body. Which, he uses these, like, the paper thing. I am so glad that I didn't make a fool of myself in the first chapters of the first book by being like, wow, being a paper mage sounds really dumb. But even though I was like, I don't know, that sounds like you could do some cool stuff with that, I never would have seen coming all of the things that Alustin can do. And it's just fascinating to me. So he wraps him up. Hope you can swim. Then he dropped the great power into the toxic yellow lake. Apex hadn't even made it halfway to shore when the magma stream reached the lake and set it on fire. The pompous idiot would almost certainly live, but he was going to have a hilariously bad time. Can we just, like, again, a hilariously bad time? It's not like, oh, he's going to have a bad time. Oh, he's going to have a really painful time. He's going to have a terrible time. It's, oh, he's going to have a bad time, and it's going to be so funny. It's going to be so fucking hilarious. Sir, I need you to find a squishmallow and a cup of cocoa and sit down and just think about things for a minute, okay? You just definitely need a moment. I don't know what the fuck is the matter with you, but dropping someone into a toxic lake and then setting them on fire and being like, oh, this is so funny. You are fucked in the head, and I don't know if any conversation from reasonable people is going to be able to move you at this point. I just don't know. So he's, we have more of him being chased, and then in the end, he only made one mistake. He stayed out of the areas of labyrinth influence where his scrying didn't work, and someone realized it. The Havathi communal bamboo great power, which still is such a weird fucking idea to me that I can barely, wrap my brain around this. So he's, trying to trigger wards to overload and whatnot. And there's this moment. The whole time they mocked him, rude rhymes about Helicote, jokes that the last echo of the Lord of Bells had really been one of the Lich's farts, an assortment of wisecracks about paper mages. Alustin just responded with a lecture on how Emblem farmers tended their fields without magic. Neither side let up on the violence for an instant. I'm going to say this is another example of I wish I was shown and not told. Man, oh man, do I wish that we actually got this dialogue. This sounds really funny. And I really don't know if it's simply like a time thing that Bierce didn't want to spend time on this scene, draw it out. But I really, really wish that instead of telling us, oh, here are some jokes they made, that we just got to hear the jokes. And it's just sort of a weird thing. And it seems like maybe it is a time thing, because this is an extremely long book. This one in comparison to the rest. So I wouldn't be surprised if it had gotten to a point where he is like, this is going to keep expanding and expanding if I take too much time doing this and that. But I feel like moments like this, it's almost more infuriating to be told about them rather than getting to read them. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't feel like it would have taken that much more time. Maybe instead of like, you know, a paragraph, it would have taken a page, but I think he could have done it. And I was just really like, man, why are you robbing me of what sounds like some really good dialogue and just like explaining it after the fact in this way? It was just, I was disappointed. So it wasn't Hugh and his friends that arrived first. It was a mad beast, 60 feet from nose to tail, that rapidly began tearing into the side of the bamboo sphere, seeking to devour the bamboo mages and Alustin. It was a scaled, furred, and feathered monstrosity with hundreds of forward-facing talons, no two alike, erupting from its flesh around its neck. Cragath Clawmane, the chimera that had been imprisoned inside Havath City's labyrinth. Cragath Clawmane, the insatiable beast that had devoured literally hundreds of people until it was captured by an entire Havathi army, whose flesh was as durable as Heliothrax and whose regeneration put any Hydra to shame, who spat venom, who shot storms of needles from each joint and exhaled clouds of hallucinogenic gas. I'm sorry, that is too much power. This is too many things. You don't get to be able to do all of those. That's too much. So he just goes for it. He was through the hole the chimera had torn in the bamboo frame, pushing his dragonfly paper wings to their limits to make space between himself and the two warring great powers. Of course, that was when his students struck. And that is the end of the chapter. So, guys, I've got a wrap here, but I am really curious how things are going to go down. I really don't know what direction this would go in, because it feels like this is a very different, this writer has different priorities in terms of how he has his characters behave than what I'm used to, which is fun. Like, I really do like that being so unpredictable. But I can't decide how things could possibly like get turned a different way with Alustin. So I guess we are just going to have to wait and see. All right, guys. Thank you again so much for hanging out with me, and I hope you're enjoying the coverage. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. Dan says a lot of book left. Yeah, it is. I'm at 60% according to Kindle at this point. So definitely a long book. But yeah, really, really curious. So I guess we'll see. Thank you guys again. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.